today is sort of the start of webinars relating to control surfaces. In fact, the month of November, we're actually going to dive into new control surface support in DP11. So there's a wealth of new things that we support now. It's actually quite amazing. In fact, let me switch over to DP just for a moment. So at the top, as you guys know, under Setup, if we go over to Control Surface Setup, look at the list here of what we're actually showing here. You know, we've got obviously support for the Akai controllers, Eucon, which we'll get into today. You know, we have legacy support for HUI, and of course, HUI is something that still is a viable way to actually use control surfaces with less control, but still it works in certain cases with certain devices. And of course, today, Brendan's going to get into the icon stuff. We have complete control now. So this is something that at the end of the month, we'll have Chris Peck come on and talk about complete control support with DP11. The Launchpad, the Novation stuff, we're going to actually get into on a separate day to talk about pad controllers. And that also relates to the Akai as well. So it's interesting, in some cases, the Akai can be used as a pad controller, but can also be used for transport and other ways of controlling it, like a traditional control surface. The mkII control, of course, is something that's been around for many years and is still a very viable way to control hardware. So think of it as MCU and a mkII control and MCU compatible. And then also a single fader mode, which is something also new to DP11. And Brandon will talk a little bit about that as well. And of course, OSC, Open Sound Control, are both, you know, new ways of controlling. There's lots of different programs. At the end, I'll actually talk about different hardware devices and products that you can use. So we're just going to, I'm actually using Eucon today. So we're actually going to just leave it set to that for a minute. So you can see the list is quite long. And there's also a list on MOTU's website. So if you go to the DP11 product page, there's actually tech specs that will also list those. So if you're looking at different products that you want to add to your studio, you can go to the MOTU website and read more about it. So to help us kick off, you know, the month here of control surfaces, we're fortunate to have Brendan today from MOTU join us. So Brendan is not only very knowledgeable and friendly and helpful employee, he's also a very talented producer and engineer. So he's been very busy working on different projects. And so he has a lot of experience in the studio. And so Adam is actually going to post here something in the chat that you guys can check out. It's actually Brendan's webpage, so you can learn more about what he does as a producer. So let's actually let Brendan come on here and he'll take us through the control surfaces that he wants to cover today.
Cool. How's it going, everybody? Good to be here. I'm sure I've talked to all of you guys at some point, either on the phone or through a tech link or something, but good to be here. Yeah, so like Matt was saying, we put a bunch of new control surface protocols in DP, kind of expanding on the mkII and, you know, basic HUI protocols that were already there. We basically just are now catering to some more like the popular control surfaces so that they match up to different controls inside of DP. So one set of control surfaces that I really like and I found to really love are the icon ones. And I ended up purchasing two for myself. Here is the QCon Pro X, which is kind of like the main unit. And this is the expander unit, the Pro XS. And you can't see the back, but they connect over USB. So this guy right here basically has like 4 USB slots, and you can, or 3 or 4 USB slots, and you can, I think, connect up to 3 expanders to them. So they're 8 channels each. So you could get, 32 channels of control surface, kind of like the old mkIIs, which I think I saw somebody still rocking somewhere on the screen. But it's, similar style to that. But what's cool about it is that these guys can either run on mkII, HUI, or I think they have like another protocol in there. But what we did is we basically took the existing mkII protocol and made it even better. So while I'm kind of going through some of the general control surface improvements that we've made, I'll be using the icon, and then I'll kind of dive into some of the more specific things the icon does over some of the other things out there. So yeah, let me switch my screen over to DP. One sec. All right, so here's just a DP, easy DP session. I just flew in some stems for a beat. So let's first set up the control surface. So if you guys don't already know, in the setup menu, control surface setup, and like Matt was saying, we got a whole bunch of drivers here. So pre DP11, you would have just chosen mkII control for any like mkII control surface device. But for the icons and anything else in this list that you specifically see here, you'll choose that version of the control surface driver. And this is what's giving you the kind of more heightened control surface support. Because if I just went to the mkII control, it would work fine, but you would be missing out on a lot of the more DP based things. Okay, so we got the icon control, and this part can get, I'll explain this part where it says the unit. So as I said, I have the main QCon Pro X, which is the main thing driving all of this. However, if you notice, my placement is that I have my main one here with my transport controls, my jog wheel, and all my buttons up here, which I'll get to. But I have the expander on the left. So if I only had, let's just say I only had this main Pro X unit here, I would choose icon control from the list. And for my input and output port, I would go and find my mouse is a little laggy here because the screen share, unconfigured ports on my Mac, QCon Pro X, and I would just choose this first channel. Links up like this, press OK. And now I have 8 channels right here. But with my scenario is that I actually have the expander XS unit to my left. So I want to have channels 1 through 8, 9 through 16, right? So in here, we actually have to go back here. Let's just cancel out of this again. And all right, so icon. And this time under the unit, since my expander is on the left, we're going to start with the expander. We're going to go and find the Pro XS there. And then I'm going to click this little plus button. It's going to create another little driver here. So again, I have 2 units. So I'm going to use 2 rows, I should say here. If I had 4, I would create 4. And I just basically order them from top to bottom. The top is 1 through 8. The next is 9 through 16. If I had a third, that would be 17 through 24 and so on. Mm-hmm. So now for icon control, that's going to be my Pro X, which is this one. We're going to do that. Press OK. And now all 16 channels are lining up. So I know it's kind of hard to see the LED screens. So I'll be describing what I'm doing. But basically what it looks like right now is that across the top here, I have the names of the tracks, and there is limited amounts of room. I should say, real estate for the name. So they do get either condensed or hyphenated. And then on the bottom here, again, I'm sorry if you can't see it, but there's 2 rows. One is the top row is pan, so you can see your pan value if you wiggle the pans and stuff. And the bottom row of this LED is volume. And that's going to show, your actual volume, readout as it would in the mixer. We'll come back to that in a second, though. Okay. So what have we done in DP11 to improve just general control surface protocol? The indicators. So one big complaint that we got over the years from people with existing control surfaces was that in DP, they could never tell where they were. What track they were on. So now if you kind of look across the bottom here, very bottom of the tracks, you'll notice a kind of blue highlight. And I believe that highlight changes based on your theme. And there's also the selection highlight. So right now I am selected on my Masterfader, which is my first track in the sequence. And if I start selecting my other tracks, you can see that selection kind of highlights the track based on the track color. So the outline in blue is your 16 tracks. I've created 16 tracks on my control surface, and that's what it's mirroring. If I move it from, track to track, that chunk of 16 moves along with it. And then my selection, when I'm selecting the tracks, it becomes highlighted in that track's color. So that was one thing we brought with DP11. And a lot of that is also, you can see the clips window has it. The sequence editor has it along the left side here. And I don't believe the tracks overview has it. It might. No, it does not. Yeah, so it's the sequence, clips, mixing board, and I'm pretty sure that's it. But you get this chunk of, the highlight here to let you know what tracks you're on if you ever need to reference it aside from looking at the screen. Another thing we did, if we just pop back to the mixing board, is that you can now see my left hand, or excuse me, my right hand side is just a small VRAC with UVI, serum, and polysynth. And let's pop over to that. And one thing that wouldn't happen was that control surfaces wouldn't show you the tracks in your VRAC, because tracks in your VRAC kind of get lifted out of your normal sequence. But we kind of put this, I wouldn't call it a workaround, it's just more of a feature where now not only can you see your VRAC tracks in the mixing board, but you can also, if you're in the sequence editor or you're in the tracks overview or you're in the MIDI editor at the time, the control surface, these 3 tracks right here are still showing my UVI workstation, my serum, and my polysynth, which are in my VRAC. So they can always be in view if you want them to. And the way we control that is back in the control surface setup, there's a new item right here that you might notice called track filtering. And this applies to any control surface. The icon does it really well, where you have 3 options. So this is basically dictating what is showing on the control surface. When we are in pin to mixer mode, it means that the tracks are going to pin. Let's switch back to the mixer. The tracks are going to pin to whatever is showing in the mixer. So if I take the track selector and I take out these tracks, then my control surface is going to follow. I'll just take all of them out. You'll see that, okay, so now I only have these tracks are left. And if I bring them back in with the track selector, they all repopulate. The other option is pin to focus window. So I personally don't work like this, but maybe some of you do, where if you had a certain amount of tracks showing in the mixing board, and then you went over to the sequence, and so now see those tracks are showing in this window, it basically gives you the ability to set the amount of tracks you want to see in the sequence editor, for instance. And if I pop back over to the mixing board, now these tracks are taken out, or you can have another track layout or something for the mixing board. This would be more for like, I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I personally don't like to work that way, but it's there. And then the third option is just show all tracks. So this one is just regardless of what's showing in the mixing board, I can take all of this out. Everything is still showing and accessible on my control surface. So I hope that explains that. I'm just going to make sure we're showing all tracks again. And I'm going to switch this back to pin to mixer because that's what I want. Press OK. And Matt kind of touched on this already, but I think I'll just re-mention again that MCU single fader one. If any of you are familiar with like the, so Icon makes one called the Platform Nano, and Presonus makes one called the Faderport. I think they're on version 2 now or version 3. This is going to give you the control of those single fader control surfaces inside of DP. Again, they also ran on basic mkII or HUI protocol, but this MCU single fader is a newly designed version or an updated version specifically for single fader control surfaces that use mkII protocol. And again, why DP11 is helpful with that also is now, like I said, we have the track selection and the identifying what track you're on, and we have all the new pin to mixer settings and stuff, because the single fader ones you oftentimes don't have a screen, so you can't really see what track you're on. You kind of just have to visually go by what's showing in DP. So if you're looking to get a single fader control surface, definitely DP11 is the way to go. All right, cool. So Icon, like I said, I was like pleasantly surprised by the Icon stuff. I'm not a spokesperson for them, but I worked with those guys for the last year before DP came out on this new updated protocol. The reason why we kind of chose them to work with us is because of these overlays. So when you get an Icon control surface, it comes with a bunch, and I'll show them on this camera over here. Maybe this is a better view right here. Mm-hmm. Comes with these overlays, and you get them for every major DAW software out there. It's literally like a bundle of like 12. and they come with the icons, whichever one you get. Or I think, I'm sorry, only this one, because this is the one that has the thing on it. And what we did was that they had a digital performer overlay for many years, but we started to notice that a lot of the features either that were printed on the overlays either weren't relevant anymore, or it was too cluttered, or we wanted to, advertise new features or more common features that people are using. And that's why we worked directly with them to create a new version of this overlay. So the one I have now is not the old one, it is the new one. And this is new for DP11. So that is kind of why I'm hot and heavy with the DP stuff, or with the icon stuff running instead of DP, because there's not really another control surface out there with this heavy implementation into DP. Not only that, but their stuff is like very reasonably affordable. So that's all I'll say about that. And we'll kind of dive into the features of the icon. So I know you guys are going to not be able to see it from my end, but let me just bring up the, okay. So this is a closer look at what the overlay looks like. And I'll just kind of go through each section here. The top portion here, escape, is just normal escape. The DAW mode over here, you can't see it, I don't think, on my camera, but up here is actually just a way, when the icon boots, it's just a way of choosing what mode you go into. So these aren't empty because they don't mean anything in DP. They're empty because they are permanent buttons on the icon. The counter, this button right here, if you look over where my finger is, there's actually a readout here. And this counter button will actually cycle through measures, beats, real time, frames, and samples, I believe. Yep, there's samples. So when I press play, let me make sure our volume is good. Are you guys going to hear this? Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, you'll just see that when this starts rolling, this counter is going to match up with my counter in DP. Obviously there's a delay on Zoom, but I'll just cycle through to show you. So it's all pretty crisp and it all lines up. I mean, where did I just land? Yeah, 23, measure 23, beat 2. Yep, that's all lined up. So it's very in sync. It's very responsive. So I do like having that readout when I'm not really looking at the screen. Going into the next level here is one of the things we specifically changed for DP11 is just this group of eight buttons right here is just going to cycle you through a few things, some windows in DP, and some actions. So let's see if we can mess with this. So if I go to my tracks, so the first button is sequence editor. So click that, jumps to my sequence editor. Next button is quick scribe. Next button is mixing board. Next button is the clip editor. So this opens and closes the clip editor. And below some of those are what we would call like shift options or second layer options. So the shift button's down here. And if I do a shift on this button, brings me to the tracks overview. Shift on this button, MIDI editor. And then shift on this button brings me to the clips window. So we're kind of covering most of the major windows inside of DP. I personally work out of the sequence editor. So, we have that there. Sequence editor and tracks overview, probably two of the more common ones. So that's why they're on the first button. In the next row, we have some more like actions. So this new marker button will just drop a marker wherever your wiper is. So I can just keep clicking that all day and it'll just, make as many markers as I need. If I drag my wiper over here, new marker, I could even scroll with the scroll wheel, new marker. There we go. And it'll do that. So that's that. And what's the next action there? This one doubles for tracks group and chunks, or a set list as it is in Performer Lite. So you can see if I'll just close out of this. If I open track groups, brings up my track groups window. And if I do shift that button, brings up my chunks. And the final two, I believe, are track group related. Yep. So there's new track group and track group suspend. So let's pop over to the mixing board real quick. So I've now selected these tracks right here, and then I'll click new track group, and it'll create a new track group for me. So now with a single fader, I can adjust that. And same goes for the other direction as well, or any automation you do that will follow. And let's say though, I wanted to adjust just my, overhead 2, what I've called it here, without messing with, without unlocking permanently the track group. I can hold my track group suspend button and move that fader without being adjusted by the group. I release it, and now we should be back to a group. Yep, there we are. So again, new track group, and then track group suspend allows you to move a fader in a group without adjusting the whole group, release it, and now we're back to a normal group. So I use that quite a bit for, when I'm quickly working on things. The track group suspend is like extremely helpful. If I've already thrown something in a group when I'm mixing and, need to just quickly adjust something without breaking the rest of the group. Cool. So let's see. We're in the mixing board. Okay. Yeah. One thing that we also did for DP11. So on the QCon Pro X's, the icon, this guy right here, they have a stereo Masterfader meter here. And it has its own fader here. Now, I use Pro Tools a lot too, and they don't even have this with their current HUI implementation. But you can see how the Masterfader is my first track in my mixing board all the way on the left. And what we've done is we've allowed you to basically, the Masterfader exists as a track, but it also is pinned to this far right fader. So if you pay attention to these two, if I move my Masterfader track, you'll also see it's moving this guy over here. And when I move tracks in my mixing board, this stays the same. And what this allows me to do is just have a constant reference for where my Masterfader level is at. And I can have a nice little lovely meter over here. Not that I'm touching the Masterfader a whole bunch, but it was one of my requests that, like, since the Masterfader is a track, I don't like losing track of it. I don't like losing sight of it. I like to just know where it is. And if I do move things around, or I, let's say, hide it from my track selector or something, I still have it pinned over here. So that was one thing I really liked specifically about the icon, and we were able to put that implementation in. So aside from all the volume, everybody's used to the bi-directional motorized faders and volume and stuff like that. There's also pan knobs at the top of here. So if I start kind of messing with these, you'll see the pan knobs kind of go back and forth. And one thing that we purposely put in here is that these are not only rotary encoders, but buttons. So if you double tap, they snap back to 0. Am I snapping the right one? Yeah, there we go. And if you can see it on the video, there are little LEDs that indicate how far left or right you are. And then center is just like a little LED in the center. So I'm not sure how well you guys can see that. And then again, if I double tap, snap them all back to 0, or back to center, I should say. I do really like that feature. And same with the sends. So right now, let me bring this back up. How this control surface works, right now, it's on this pan button. So the pan, this row, yeah, we might as well just go to this row. This row dictates what is showing either on the screen up here or on the rotary encoders. So right now we're in pan mode, which is the default mode, which means that these knobs up here are going to affect the pan. If I switch it to sends, now the rotary encoders at the top become, they adjust the sends up here. So where's HH5, and it has readouts as well. So bus 1 and 2, bus 3 and 4, bus 1 and 2. So these are my effect sends. So like up here, you can see I'm moving that, I'm moving this guy, and same deal. So if you tap once, it mutes the send. And if you tap twice, it jumps it to 0. So this actually will double tap, jumps it all the way up to 0. One tap will mute the send. And then to switch back to pan, I just click this. So those are basically the two things that I'm bouncing back and forth between. The plugins I'll also use. So plugins is this button over here. And I don't have many plugins running, but for instance, my Masterworks FET76, it shows that I have this plugin right here on my track. If I, let's see, what is it? Double click. Nope. Well, I'll go, oh yeah, double click bypasses it. And then pressing and holding brings the plugin up. And then pressing and holding again brings it down, closes it. So press and hold brings it up, double tap, bypassed, double tap again, enabled, press and hold, closed. And that's while you're in the plugin mode. And now I switch back to pan and I'm back into normal operation. The IO one, if you guys caught that, I wouldn't use this as much, but you can assign inputs and outputs to tracks. There's just limited real estate here. And sometimes that stuff is like, you really need to focus in on like what you're assigning, inputs and outputs to tracks, especially if you're doing a lot of busing and stuff like I usually do. The next row are your automation modes. So by default, DP is by default is latch, but it's really just read or automation play. So how this works is that in this row, you hold a button down and then select a track. Hold a button down, select a track, and that assigns that automation mode to that track. So if we just go, let's just say my clap track, which is here. And if I hold my read on and off and press select, or did I do that right? There we go. Yep. So just look right up here. You'll see it just turned automation off. So automation play toggles on and off when I'm doing that. Let me move my mouse out of the way. We'll stay on this track. The next one over is touch. So hold touch, hit my clap, select on my clap track, and it's going to change that to touch, which is automation record. So off, on, off. Next one is trim touch, which just changes the, goes to, automation arm as well as the trim touch mode. And that again can be on and off. And then next one is overwrite. Next one is latch, which just brings you back to the latch mode with the record, and then trim latch, and then back to just off and on. So it always comes back to the default, which is latch, just normal, playing back automation. But this is, it's kind of cool for like, I've been using this a lot for, just doing like automation curves and writing a fader or writing a send. And being able to quickly switch back and forth between like, okay, I want to overwrite on this track, and then I put in my stuff, and then I come back over here and like, boom, it's done. So really like that. And yeah, down here, shift, control, save, they do what you think. It's just modifier keys right here, shift, control, option, command. So these can be used in correlation with any of these, or, they work the same as the modifier keys on your keyboard. Save, saves the project. Audible mode will toggle the audible mode icon up here, which everybody somehow forgets where that is, but that's where it is. This is what would allow you to hear back MIDI notes when you click on them. So if you wanted to toggle that, audible mode right there. You have an undo and a redo button. So Command Z or Shift Command Z, undo, redo. And then flip. This is probably the thing I use the most. I do all of my reverbs, delays, choruses, phasing is mostly done on aux tracks. So I'm usually, instead of having those plugins on my audio tracks or my instrument tracks, I'm always sending to something. So let's see, what track was that on? So let's just see if I do, hi-hat 5. I can come down here. What do I want to do here? Let's do insert, and I'll do like a send a, fine. Do that. And sure, I can write it in, But if I flip this, it takes my, well, first I have to go into send mode, sorry. Flip basically takes what's going on up here and puts them down in the faders. So if we're in pan mode and I press flip, now all of my volumes are up here and my pans are here with like, you know, the middle being center, but I don't really use it for that. I use it for sends. So if I go into sends mode, click flip. So now I have sends on faders. So now if I take hi-hat number 5, I put it into overwrite and I press the record, I can now write in that send automation.
Nice.
That makes sense, everybody? Yeah. So, and then again, take it out. That was hi-hat 5, hit the flip again, and I'm back to doing this. So it makes for quick and easy automation without having to write the send stuff on the rotary encoders, which gets a little funky. Yeah. And then these buttons down here, you know, your normal channel, going back and forth. And then there's a bank of 8. So I can bank up or down by 8. Your normal transport buttons here, rewind, fast forward. This little guy's a memory cycle. Oh yeah, this is pretty cool, actually. This is something that wasn't originally here. Let's get some space over here. So yeah, so shift memory cycle starts the memory cycle at the wiper. And if I move the wiper down and I do control memory cycle, that's where it ends the memory cycle. So you can, you know, make memory cycle loop points somewhat quickly. And then of course, just tapping it once turns it off and on again. There's some zoom functions at the bottom. So these will either, in your edit windows, will either zoom in or zoom out or zoom up or zoom down. If you click the zoom and then go in, so the arrows normally just move you around the project, up or down. With the zoom button enabled, it actually zooms you in, you know, in or out more. Yeah, so that's basically it. You have your record enable, solo, mute on all the tracks. There must not be an input assigned to that one, but yeah, that's basically it on the icon. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I think I covered everything. What do you think, Matt?
It's great. Absolutely. And you were saying scrubbing for doing transport stuff. And
yeah, so this will scrub, which is pretty nice to just get you, you know, quickly to other places in the project. Yeah, when the scrub button's engaged, it goes even slower. And you could be like playing back. Yeah. So you guys get it. Yeah, so that's basically it on the icon. Again, I really dig it. And I bounce back and forth between different DAWs all day, and you know, the DP integration's pretty tight. So I recommend checking it out. Again, they have these guys. They have like a slightly less expensive version. It's like the older Mark II model. I think it's called the G2. Then they have the Platform Nano, which is their one fader thing. Yeah. That's
excellent. Oh, so fantastic. Thanks for showing that. And then did you want to chat a little bit about the Akai?
Sure. Yeah. So let me, let's set this up again. So I'm just going to X out of this so that my faders go down here. And I'll just pop this bad boy here. So this is the Akai APC40 Mark II. Pretty popular clip and pad triggering control surface. So like Matt was saying in the beginning, it's got your basic, you know, these are pan knobs, these are volume faders. It's got your solo, mute, record, enable, some basic transport, play, record. We'll go over all that stuff in a second, but it also has the main clip section, which will line up with our clips window. I think we'll be going over that maybe next week or something.
Yep.
Cool. So the Akai APC40 Mark II, it's the first one on the list. Input port, choose it here, and the output port should match up. Okay. So those lights indicate what I have going on in the clips window, but again, that's for a different day. So let's go back to our mixing board here. These don't have, they don't have motorized faders. So you can adjust volume. They do act the same way in terms of a control surface, but if you move these faders up here, they're not going to follow because there's no motors in them. But if you touch them again, they kind of, see how that kind of like jumps back down. That's kind of like the I don't use these too much for mixing because obviously I'm using my mouse, I'm using my hands. I need them to be equal. I can't, is this easier to see? There we go. Yeah, I need them to be equal. I can't be doing this, but for people that are doing like live stuff and not touching their DAW, this is perfect. Because if they're only using this, then these will be the correct, levels when you do it. Solo. Oh, that's my master. Yep. Solo. And then if I assign, let's see here. So my audio 1, I think, is this track. Is it not? There we go. It's number 2. So these buttons that light up here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you uncheck those, that will mute it. So basically like play disabling it. And then if you bring them back on, it's the equivalent of turning the mute off or just, playing them. And if you have anything with a valid input, like my audio track here, you can pretty much easily record enable it. Track goes red. And again, this can be for clip recording as well. My transport, I just have really 2 options. There's play, and then I can record, and then punch out, stop playback. Mm-hmm. So with this device, it's, it's pretty simple. Record enable, play, press record, punch in, punch out, stop, record, disable the track. You're back to mixing again. Mm-hmm. So once you kind of get used to these types of, where everything is, and, get it acclimated to your style of recording or mixing or producing or composing, whatever you do, gets to be pretty helpful when you can just like kind of reach out and touch it with your hands. Like the icon, they have rotary encoders up here for pans. Pan is the default, but it can also go to sends. So now it shows me my sends here. And let's see, yes, I'm adjusting this guy right here. And again, this is an 8-channel device. So you'll see 8 channels highlighted here. And I believe these function as select. Yeah, they do. So this row, you can see I'm bopping around to the different tracks here. Mm-hmm. Back to pan mode. This has a designated metronome on and off switch. And I believe, I don't want to misspeak here, these are all assignable, but when you're in a control surface mode, I don't think they are.
This actually brings up an important point I wanted to mention, Brendan, which is when you're using something like this device as a control surface, it's not the same in the way it can be used as a controller, where you can take any old knob and it's spitting out a particular CC and assign that with MIDI learn and DP. You're kind of in a different mode.
Yeah, so it's a common misconception that you can have something like this do both, because what happens is that once you enable the control surface mode, this device is blocking all basic, or DP is not receiving any basic MIDI functionality from it except for the control surface features. Mm-hmm. So this is why I often recommend to people, like, people will call in and ask like, oh, I need something that does, MIDI CC, and I need it to have transport controls, and I need it to have a, volume control, or like a mixer style control surface, like the icon. And that simply just doesn't exist because CCs are not control surface protocol. That's just you firing off a CC into DP and it's getting recorded to a track. What this is doing is actually locking up to the track parameters. So it's 2 different things. So if you need to have a controller that you can write in CC data with, controller data with, then get a designated one for that, and then get a designated one for any of the other controls that you want, because people think they can do both at the same time with one, but they can't. The only thing that you can do is, like, what's cool about DP is that if you do have like a basic MIDI controller that has transport controls, you can still use it as a MIDI interface, but you can go assign it to, play, stop, record via the MIDI event column, which is right here. I'm assuming a lot of you know about it, but if you don't, you just click in here, you tap on a key on your keyboard or a transport button on your keyboard or your controller. And if there's a note populated here, that note will get assigned to the transport controls inside of DP. And you do not have to be in control surface protocol to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's about it. Oh, one other thing that's cool about the Akai is that if you look, here's my tempo up here. I'm in tempo slider mode. It has two functions that's cool. This knob will adjust the tempo. So I'll actually play it because I have my stuff in stretch mode right now. So I can slow it up or speed it down, obviously within reason. But then if I then I can bring it back up again to where it was at, 130 or whatever it was. That was also a little bit of a stretch demo right there. I realized all of them were in stretch mode. So do that too with your audio tracks.
Yeah, no, it's very cool.
So yeah, that's basically it with these two guys. Super helpful for whatever workflow you're working with. I am primarily a mixer and do mastering work and stuff too. So I'm not doing a whole lot of, I'm doing a lot of everything, but I like to control the icons for the mixing purposes and just getting me around and less time staring at the screen and, using my typing keyboard and mouse and stuff. So.
No, that's excellent. Well, that's fantastic job, Brendan. And let's open it up for any questions related to Icon or the Akai. And again, the pad part of it, guys, is coming in the next week or so. So hold off on pad related questions, but let's fire into any questions regarding the stuff that Brendan covered.
Is the QCon Pro X and the QCon G2 about the same feature-wise within DP?
Yeah, I mean, the QCon, this guy right here, the XS, it's just the volume, selection, mute, solo, record enable, and the pan. In order to access these features, you would have to have the Pro X. So you wouldn't really want to buy only the XS, the expander, if you wanted all of these controls, because this is what's driving it.
But you mentioned the other version, the G2.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your question. The G2 has all the same stuff. Yeah.
Okay. A question for clarification regarding how many faders you can use. Someone just tried to add 10 QCon extenders, even though they don't have the units, but DP allowed that person to add them into the control surface setup.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. What I'm pretty sure that Icon says from their end is that you can only do four at a time. But what I haven't seen yet is, so how this all works behind this desk is that it's just this guy connects over USB into this guy, and there's multiple other ports for other expanders, and then there's just one single USB out that goes to the computer. So this main Pro X basically consolidates all the USB connections so that you'll still only have one going to the computer, which is really ideal. But nobody has said yet, can you take another set of another Pro X with its own expanders and plug that second USB cable into the computer? I have no idea if that's possible.
But with the existing design, it maxes at 32 with the sort of obvious way you're describing, right? That one plus 3 more expanders would max at 32.
That's Icon spec. They say that they max at 32 that way. Yes. But from our end, yes, I'm sure you can add infinite amounts of, control surface drivers, but that doesn't mean that Icon can accommodate that, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I wanted to know, you have your sends in DP labeled just the ordinary as they come, bus 1, 2, and bus 3, 4. For those of us that have templates have gone and named the buses, room verb, hall verb, whatever. Giving them names. Do those names show up on the icon?
Yep. Yeah. Can you guys see that? Yeah. So if you, so I just switched to sends mode. I just renamed bus 1 and 2 to be chorus. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
And now chorus shows up on the bottom. Yeah. This is just like a demo project. My template is the same. I have everything named. All my buses are named and they all reflect that way when you throw them on here. Again, though, longer names will get condensed, but they do show up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Matt, I think that's got you caught up for questions.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So let's just continue on our way. We're going to talk about Eucon and a few other things. And yeah, great job, Brendan, as always.
Thank you.
Excellent job. All right, cool. So I'm going to take over here and let me actually unscreen share and stop. So at the top of my system, let me just hide Digital Performer for a minute. You can see that I've got installed here the Eucon driver. So at the very top of your system, if you see here, you go into the Eucon settings. You can see now this technology, the hardware devices, whether it's the legacy stuff in the case of the Euphonics or the Avid Artist Series stuff like the MC Control, MC Mix, and so on, those are all connected to the computer via Ethernet. So on the newer systems, you just want to have some kind of a breakout through USB-C, a device that actually lets you come in through Cat5, Cat6 to your system. What's nice about that, of course, is that you can have, something that's Ethernet connect to multiple computers, multiple devices. And of course, Ethernet is a very fast protocol. So you can see here in the Eucon settings, it shows that I've got this Artist Control. And again, it's the Euphonics. It's kind of a legacy product. I want to show a few features in that. And then you can set it up where you have things like your soft keys and you have ways of creating customizations to the actual software and the way that the touch screen actually operates. So that's something you would do in the actual driver settings. So that's something you'll see on the top of your system. Let me actually minimize this. So we switch over to DP for a minute. A couple things I wanted to talk about here for a minute. A couple of important points with Eucon, which is that we now support both Mac and Windows. That was something a number of Windows users wanted Eucon support. And it was kind of a big undertaking, but we have Eucon support now on Windows 10 and 11. It's great for those of you who are running that operating system. As Brandon mentioned, we have VRAC support. That's also true in Eucon. Remember, it's not Eucon specific. All the control surfaces now work. If you're actually showing the mixer view and you've added the VRAC to the mixer, you can now see those settings. That's true of Eucon as well. So that's actually really handy. And so, we'll show some images of various Eucon products, but this particular one here, this is actually, again, this legacy MC Control. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how that works. So if you see here in the mixer settings, this is only 4 faders, but we do have the ability to select, make our selection for which track we're going to use. Of course, up above, you'll see that we have the ability to solo a track, or on-off is basically mute for that. And of course, the touch screen itself, we've got the 8 different buttons here. And basically the idea is that you can focus on things like inserts, pan, aux sends, and so on. And of course, these are where you can assign various buttons to either the actual soft keys, even doing things like surround, setting up. There's a lot of these that are very customizable in that way. And then, of course, on the upper right, you have the ability to open and close various edit windows. Of course, you have your transport control. And I'll actually go back into DP for a minute and actually show you how some of these actually operate. But one of the most important things to know about this particular control surface is that every key has multiple functions. And in the right and left corner of the unit, these home buttons are sort of like modifier keys. So as you're doing something and you hold the modifier key, now you're getting into a different function of that button or knob. And so it's pretty well laid out here where you can actually have multiple hardware devices, and being Ethernet, it's actually quite responsive and works really well. So let me actually go over in DP and I'll just do a few little things we've talked about here. Let me share a screen on my end. Cool. So we've got, again, up under setup, we go back into control surface setup. I've got it set right now to Eucon, which is pin to focus window. So we were talking about something that, might pertain to you if you're working in one particular environment. Let's say in the case of the sequence editor, like you said, I might just want to look at 4 tracks, and now it only shows those tracks because remember, it's about which window is in focus. So if you're in the mixing board, if you're in the sequence editor, it will follow that. And like we said, if I go over here to something like the piano track and I actually hit, now notice how it actually darkens here and it shows that that's selected. So that's actually pretty handy to see which one's which. And of course, now I could start doing the automation. If I go over to the mixing board for a minute, now, if I go over to the control surface and I actually select and click on the piano, you'll notice that I can click up above on inserts. Then if I hold the modifier home key and I actually click on, it'll show me a list on the screen itself of the plugins I'm running. So if I hold the modifier home key and click on the leveler, it pops it up. And now, of course, also what's handy is that I have the list of the parameters for each and every plugin. So again, there's quite a lot you can do with not only pop editing the plugins themselves, but actually editing the functions of those plugins. and being able to make the selection of which track you're on. And remember, holding the modifier key and closing the window will close the active plugin window. So again, opening plugins, modifying the parameters, closing plugins. I want to talk for a minute about down below, if you guys remember that jog wheel. If I go back to the tracks window for a minute. So right now, we can set it to shuttle. And of course, you'll see shuttling here is going to let me make jumps here, which is pretty handy. And then what's nice is if I switch this button right next to the shuttle, I can actually set it to zoom. So you can actually just kind of toggle back and forth. Do you want to zoom in and out on the tracks, whether you're in the sequence editor? Do you want to actually shuttle and move left to right, or you want to actually zoom in? So you've got those different functions there built in. And of course, the transport keys. So again, just a very quick overview of being able to use a piece of the hardware. And we will actually talk about the different Eucon products that are out there. I did want to actually focus for a minute. Let me go back over out of screen share for a minute so that you can see on the camera. Let me actually toggle on my iOS device here, an iPad, to the Avid Control. So let me do that for a second. So now, what's actually pretty amazing here is, let me bring this over, and I'm going to switch over to make sure that Digital Performer is in the foreground. So you remember when I showed you guys the Eucon settings there from the driver? Well, if I go back now up above, you'll be able to see that I have both the Avid Control iOS device, the app, and the hardware running at the same time. So this is very cool. So I want Adam to put in the chat a link to this product, this Avid Control product, that's basically free. So this is an app that will run on an iOS device, whether an iPad or an iPhone. It also runs on Android and Windows. So this is great. So Android support. Now it's great. All you have to do is basically set up a free account from Avid. And what's nice is that it will run in conjunction with the hardware. So for instance, in the case of running, let's say the Avid S1 and the Avid Control app, they can run at the same time. So this is actually quite flexible. So in the app itself, let me actually switch over here to Zoom. So if you guys can see here on this, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you'll be able to switch between the mixer view, the tracks view, channel view. Obviously, you can also use it as a meter. So it's pretty handy. Let's say you actually have physical hardware like an S1 or an S3, and you also are running the iPad Avid Control app at the same time. Well, you can do the physical faders, right? And you can also just have the iPad running as a meter bridge. So that's actually pretty handy. They run at the same time. So that's something I want you guys to take advantage of. Get this download for your iOS device or Android and be able to run it with Digital Performer and have remote control. Now remember, once this is enabled as a Wi-Fi device on your same system, when you launch it and you go into DP's Eucon, that's it. Now you get to select whether you want to have it pinned to the mixer, show all the tracks, show the window focused tracks, and so on and so forth. So this is a really nice integration that I want you guys to see and take advantage of. So just as a reminder, to be able to set those, whether, again, how are you going to view the pinning of the mixer, how to enable the Eucon, and how to actually enable which device and see which device in the actual settings. I do want to go over for a minute and talk about a Keynote. I want to show you a list of devices. Some of the stuff that Brendan covered today, I want you guys to look at the different products that are available for Digital Performer, because there's a lot that we've added here in DP11. So let me do that on my end. I'm going to switch over. Let me hide Digital Performer, and we'll go over here to a Keynote. So in the Keynote, so see some of the products that Brendan covered, the QCon Pro X, and you can see obviously there's the options, the panels that you can lay over there, which is nice. And so let's talk about, there's the expander. And of course, here is the G2. And there's the expander for the G2. And here's a small product from Icon here, the Platform X. And it's nice, a small footprint. And again, these are connecting to the system via USB. Now you'll notice in the case of the Platform M that on the right there, you got some more functions and some buttons there and kind of a Masterfader on the far right side of this particular product from Icon. So remember, Icon is a sort of a subset of MCU, right? As Brendan pointed out, that it is kind of based on the code for mkII Control, but our developers took it a step further and added more functionality to it. So that's kind of a critical point. And of course, Brendan mentioned that there's a nano. So this is for the person looking for the single fader option, right? It's something that we support directly. So, and in this case, you've got the single fader and it'll update. And now that you can make your selections and you get feedback showing which tracks are selected, it makes it easier to use a product like this. So again, maybe many of you don't necessarily need a ton of faders, but you might be doing writing a vocal or doing something like that where you want to have one fader and you can assign it. So you've got that functionality now with this product, the Platform Nano. Here's a version of the Nano that's actually connects to your system through Bluetooth. So that's kind of also handy. If you don't really want to set up cables, or let's say you're in a situation where you've got it charged and you're sitting at the piano or something like that, and it's in the studio and you want to be able to just have that remote control. There's so many ways now, right? I mean, now with having products that are iOS based or Android based, do you want to do it through an iPad, a tablet? Do you want to do it with hardware? That's what I want you guys to gain from this particular keynote is that, the sky's the limit now in DP11. We've just done so much with supporting different hardware controllers and, of course, virtual ones as well. So let's talk about Avid. We were talking about, in my case, a legacy MC control or an artist series interface that's still supported and still works with all the new functionality and support. Also true of the Avid Control. And so here's the S1. S1 is obviously, it has physical tactile faders, and you slip an iPad into it. And that way you have that nice control. And you can have up to 4 interfaces connected on DP. So that's the S1. And of course, the big brother to the S1 is the S3. And again, this product works with Digital Performer. This is where you want to have, obviously more faders and more control right there in front of you. So this is the Avid S3, and as it moves up from there into the S4, on up to the S6. So these are all products that DP11 support. It's just a question of, obviously, you budget, what do you need to do? And as Brendan importantly pointed out, making a huge distinction between what a control surface does and what a MIDI controller does, and making sure that you understand that distinction so that you buy the product that makes the most sense. It's funny, at some point now you're thinking, okay, what kind of work do you do? Are you doing mixing, audio mostly? Or, of course, many of us do many things, right? You're composing, you're doing mixing, mastering work. And so finding the right combination of products where you have hands-on control surface support and being able to assign controllers, because DP, don't forget that it has all the great MIDI learn features. So every plugin and every parameter, not only in MOTUs included, virtual instruments and plugins, is MIDI learnable. It's true of third party. So there's so much you can do. So where do you actually assign those things? Do you have a MIDI controller? Do you have weighted keyboards? Again, I want you guys to start thinking about your setup, how to best optimize it, find the right products for you. And so we talked about the Avid Control app, which is free. You set up an account, and it works on Android and iOS. And it's a great way, by the way, to have remote control of DP. Sitting at your drum set, sitting, at the piano, and having control remotely. And in this case, there's a lot this can do. So you can see in this particular case, we're looking at the mixer environment. And I just have a few other screenshots I want you guys to see. So here's actually looking specifically at the channel. So look, you actually can get into your various parameters within a plugin like EQ. Here's sort of a tracks window where it's showing you multiple, meters, multiple tracks at the same time. So it reminds me of like the meter bridge in a way. You don't have direct control of those levels, but you can just get a quick visual feedback on everything happening at that time. So that's also pretty handy. And then of course, here's the ability to look at soft keys. So it's quite programmable. And remember, it's written specifically for Digital Performer. So in the link that Adam provided, this is something that works with Digital Performer. So Avid has made sure that that's the case. And since we support, the Eucon protocol, this is all part of what you get. So think about that for a minute, whether maybe you have a device in your studio that you can use specifically for transport control. And that's all happening now with the Avid Control app. So I wanted to talk about mkII Control. mkII Control obviously is there's a universe of stuff. And so there might be products in here. I'm sure there are products that I'm not going to cover today, but I wanted to hit on a few products that do work with DP. And again, that might be suitable for what you're looking for. So in this case, the Faderport 16 is MCU compatible. And you can see nice to have 16 faders right in front of you there. And that's a product that we support. And of course, the smaller version of it is the Faderport 8. And here's the little fader port, which many of you know is a single fader that will update now to the selected track in DP11. So you have, again, one fader control. And of course, we still have support for the original mkII Control Universal. So those are legacy products, but many of you have them and they're still supported. And you'd be able to take advantage of the new features like the new pin to mixer, those kinds of new functionalities is built into these products. So there's the mkII Control Universal. The Behringer X-Touch is a product that we support that also speaks MCU. So that's something that you could buy and use with Digital Performer 11. And let's not forget that we also support Slate Digital Raven. We had somebody come on from Slate Digital. Jamie came on and gave us a fantastic demonstration of it. So again, a very deep way to control DP on top of everything else we discussed. I mean, today Brendan's showing how he uses Icon for the projects he works on. We're talking about Eucon, mkII Control, and then of course now we have the Slate Raven, right? So it's sort of the sky's the limit. This is a very tight integration between DP and Raven. And of course, now going back into the virtual world, right? Here's TouchOSC. So if you look for that product, Google it. Hexler is the company that develops this software, and it's very flexible. And remember, when we were in control surface setup, we could select OSC, Open Sound Control, and we were able to go in here and set up, on our own iOS device and have control and be able to make our assignments to things like transport and things like that. So a couple others I wanted to mention in the virtual world. Composer Tools Pro. Steve Steele talked about this as a way to integrate and get into various articulations. This would be a particularly great tool for articulation maps, being able to set up and have, where you're basically firing off different CCs, controlling, virtual instruments, things like that. So it's almost like you're kind of scratching your head now thinking, okay, so I have the icon for transport control. I've got an iPad for doing Metagrid. I've got another iPad for doing Avid. It's sort of like, how many devices are you going to sort of set up in the studio? What makes the most sense? But again, it depends on what your primary work is. That's something you really need to think about. Composer Tools Pro, I wanted to just mention a couple things in there. And this is where you'd be able to get into things like QuickScribe and do a lot of the work with that. And let's not forget that Giovanni Rotondo came on early in the webinar series and talked about a product that he makes for Digital Performer called Composer Bridge. So just as a reminder, very specific software for doing things like being able to compose and switch layers and do articulations and that kind of very specific MIDI orchestration work. This is a product that's designed for that. So Composer Bridge, something you can Google and you'll find is something you can use. And again, for those who are very deeply into MIDI and orchestration, that would be more defined, more set up for that. So that's sort of the end of the line here, I think, in terms of talking about products. Again, whether it's hardware products, quit that for a second, switch over to DP. Do you want tactile fader control through Eucon, Icon, MCU, or things like Akai? And we're going to get next week into things like pad controllers with Novation and Akai. Are you going to go more into the virtual world with Metagrid? So a lot of choices to make. And of course, DP11 supports it all, which is amazing. And not only does it support it, it supports it at the same time. Right? That's what's actually unbelievable about that, is to have multiple sort of languages and protocols happening at the same time. So that's kind of what today was about. And of course, Brendan did an excellent job showing us and walking us through the first batch. Questions, general questions about DP?
Hey, Matt, I would throw one at you about the virtual Eucon. You actually have to be running Eucon on the machine to get that to work. And I imagine you can set your own, like with a real a physical unit, you can actually set the soft keys or define the soft keys as you choose. True?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the Avid Control, you've got not only true of just the software itself, the iOS or the Android software, but actually in the physical software, in the physical tactile hardware, you have programmability with the soft keys. So,
and the other thing I would say, I have multiples of these different things running concurrently. And you can actually set up the control surface setup page in DP to run more than just the icon stuff or the Eucon stuff. You could actually, or the Raven or the complete control or whatever, you can actually have them all tied to DP at the same time, and they all will work. And you can touch any one of them at a time, and they'll all talk to DP and control whatever you tell them to control.
Yep. Absolutely.
Pretty incredible.
It is.
How about Ella?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Is DP11 supporting the Presonus surface is better than DP10? Because I find a lot of the buttons don't actually do anything.
Matt, I can touch on that. So yes, in short, DP11 is better with the fader port specifically than DP10. So the mkII driver is the same as it's always been. That's what exists in DP10 and prior. The MCU-compatible one, try that out with your fader port in DP11. You can try the DP11 demo, see how well it does, because we did make improvements to the fader ports specifically, I believe. And then beyond that, if there are specific things you're looking for, just write to us, tell them what buttons you want to correlate to what, and we'll take it into consideration and likely make those changes.
Brendan or Matt, there's a question in the chat about Nektar products. Is that supported?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Nektar MIDI controllers, obviously. Which Nektar product specifically?
There was no specific one, but the user just typed in LX88.
LX88 just looks like let's see. It looks like just a basic MIDI controller. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about before. So this is where we need to distinguish the difference between a control surface and a MIDI controller. That is a MIDI controller. It will work with DP, of course, but this does not have a control surface driver. I can almost guarantee that. I've never used one, but I can almost guarantee it doesn't, because it's just got your normal assignable knobs, assignable faders, and pads, things that you don't generally see on a control surface. But like I was saying before, you can, if you want to use that transport control on the LX88 to control the transport, you can just assign those buttons to the commands in the MIDI event column in the commands list in DP.
Another user said the LX88 works great, so clearly somebody's having success with it. Somebody else asked, they have an old Tascam FW1884 Firewire 400 control surface and interface. Does anyone write 64-bit drivers for old devices like that, let alone an old Firewire 400 device?
I don't know about a Tascam, but there's a company called, oh my gosh, they're European. Hold on, let me look. I know they write drivers for the old DigiDesign control 24s and some of the older DigiDesign stuff, and they tend to do it for non-Eucon stuff as well. Let me look what they're called.
And Brendan, it kind of reminds me of the guy that works on AlphaTrack. I think it's come down to one guy that actually writes the code for that.
Is it Neyrinck? Neyrinck. They make something called V Control. Yeah, I had to use Control 24 at one point, and I used that software to, it basically like resurrects the old DigiDesign Eucon protocol and like translates it into a modern Eucon protocol so that you can use it. I think it was like $50. I wouldn't be surprised if they had other options too, because I'm looking on their website and it looks like they write stuff for like current and old, Presonus. Let's see, some other stuff too. So yeah, Neyrinck.
That user says there's still hope, and thanks.
No problem.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next time.